Hey everybody, it's Paul Reed Smith and I'm here with the PRS amp designer Doug Sewell.
Hello Paul. Could you give us the story of the inception of this idea and how it all started?
I've always wanted to open the amp. I mean, I got asked in one of the interviews once if I got to play through one rig in life, which I would have wanted to play through Hendrix's rig at Woodstock. I'm sorry, that would have been very informative.
Yeah.
So somehow you and I have an affinity getting a hold of these old amplifiers, and the first one we got a hold of the amp that Dwayne Allman was using in the Allman Brothers. Remember, we got that phone call.
Absolutely.
God, that was fun. And for years and years, I was trying to get to open the amp that Hendrix was using. At the time, I didn't know whether it was his touring amp or recording amp, but I knew there was one at the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle, Paul Allen's museum, and I knew the amp was there, and I wanted to open it up, and I spent a good period of time working with Janie and her team. There was a lot of talk about wanting to recreate this amp, and then finally she called the museum and said, I want you to let them in and let them open this amp. And they said, of course. And I came up here into this room and I said, hey, Doug, guess where we get to fly? There was a reverence to it. I mean, his purple hat was sitting next to it.
Goodness, yeah.
The drums that Mitch Mitchell used at Woodstock were sitting there. There was all this stuff laying everywhere. And this one thing was the one thing we wanted to open. We wanted to open his amp. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you for inviting me here.
You know, we're releasing these HX100 and HX50 amps, and I don't know what you think of this thing exactly. I know, for me, when I plug into an amplifier, the rarest of birds will be super clean if you're barely touching it.
Yep.
They start to get aggressive when you hit it a little harder, and if you hit it really hard, it'll do it. And you never touch the volume control, right?
Just dynamics.
I hear that a lot. What is your experience? Can you play for everybody and show everybody what you thought?
You know, for me, clean is a big part of my sound. So I like to be able to, like you said, if dynamically I'm playing a little softer and I just want it to be as clean as possible, still strong, still loud, still clear. But, you know, when you push a little bit, it breaks up really nice.
permission to go open this thing and look in it.
Right.
And you should tell everybody what your experience of opening it was from an amp builder's point of view. I know it was a rat's nest. They had done a lot to keep from power tubes from blowing. That was clear.
That was the deal. And we kind of had prepped ourselves because there's some good information on the internet about what was done to Jimmy's amps place in the West Coast, Oregon and amplifier service. But when we got out there, this huge vault in the bottom of a building, and with all these museum quality storage units with muslin on them and little ties and things. So they pull them out, and everybody's wearing gloves, that kind of a thing. And you pull it out of this box, and it turns out to be an old Marshall. We've seen them before. So I don't know if you remember this. A quick story. I was looking with my gloves on through the amp.
Oh yeah, they wouldn't let you touch it without gloves. Right. That's right.
And there was a broken needle that was underneath the leg of the transformer. Yeah. And they had me back up. And the guy went over with tweezers and things, and he pulled it out and puts it in a little envelope and said, "Okay, you can keep going."
I mean, it's just turn the amp on with that could be a short. It's not a good idea.
No, but still, they were that careful with the whole thing.
Look, there were a bunch of tone changes they had done to it too. It was halfway between an old Super 100 JTM 45 and a Super Lead. It was somewhere in the middle. Right. It was not a stock amplifier. I actually want everybody to know this was not stock. Yeah. And they had done everything in their power to keep it from blowing power tubes. Right. It was clear to me that they didn't want this thing going down on the road.
Plus, they were tuning these things to work with Jimmy's tone preferences and his pedals and things like that. Yeah. But there were some interesting tone things that were done, and they weren't just dedicated to beefing it up. Right. There was some things
they clearly knew what they were doing.
All right.
It was clearly one of his amplifiers.
Absolutely.
It was,
Look at pictures of Jimmy at Woodstock, and you see those little oval white stickers in the back of the amp, and that was it. So we got the benefit of being able to look right at it and
document it.
Right. So. That was the inspiration to get us started on it. And we didn't just take that and try to copy it exactly.
No, that was not what the goal. The goal was to learn what that circuit was, learn why it was such a good circuit for turning your volume down, learn why it handled pedals so well, learn why it made, the thing that surprised me when we came home and made the first clone is it made the bass pickup of a guitar sound like the treble pickup. I'd never experienced that before, and it was getting things that I'd heard on records that I had not experienced before, which I thought was really cool. Right. The other thing that was surprising, it was obvious they didn't have road cases because it was stenciled all over the thing, handle with care, be careful with this thing. It was obvious that they wanted it to work at the next show. Yeah. Then we get the idea that we're going to get this circuit to work. Right. And the first discussion was, we don't want it to look like what it was. It's okay to be one of our amplifiers. I didn't want to make a clone of the way it looked. Right. I wanted to have the tone of the circuit. And so we started buying all these old Marshalls so that we would be able to match the transformers. And we knew what the output transformers of that amp were. And we were buying amplifiers that had the same output transformers. And when we were making the clones, we were comparing them apples to apples, exactly the same settings to make sure that we had those transformers nailed. And we found one of the people that was making those transformers back in the day, and he was able to remake the transformers for us. And for us, that was a huge deal to get not just the same sound of the transformers, but to get them beat a little bit.
You can take individual parts of an amp or anything really, and break them down on individual parts, but when you finally get them together, there's some magic that happens when all of the components are right, the voltages, and everything kind of works together. That's why these old amps, some of them were better than others, because they varied a lot. This one had some capacitors in it that were pretty rare, some WEMAs instead of the old mustards, and so there were some things going on, but when you get all these parts and pieces kind of in a spot, the sum of the parts is better than all the parts individually. In other words, they don't just add up. It's just like all of a sudden you've got something that kind of transcends it all. And it took us a long time. I mean, You know, we went from aluminum chassis to metal chassis to bridge rectifiers to full wave bridges. You know, just all these things that, and then
That we saw
caps. And this guy right here.
Hang on a minute. I went on the great cap hunt.
Well, that's the deal, man.
I went and bought every single capacitor made of every value was there, and did huge shootouts with the original caps until we found ones that sounded as good. That was because it's a series event. The sound goes from this part into that part, into this part, into that part, into this part, and between the capacitors, the power supplies, and the transformers, we had a project on our hands.
You know what I mean? So, cool, dude. Fun times here in Annapolis, Maryland.
Well, I'm glad you like the amp.
I'm having a blast with it.
I'm really glad you like
Having a
it.
blast.
We're releasing the HX50 and the HX100. And
Yeah,
of
man.
the 3 people demonstrating today, you're the only one that's used one live.
Ah, that's right.
And
With tape over the of the logos, so it's still a secret.
did you do that
I
for
did,
us?
yeah, man.
So you're using your pedal board, and there's an awful lot of different kinds of sounds that
Yeah.
you have to get in the different projects that you're doing. Can you take us through some of that? Can you take us through some of the rhythm stuff and
Sure.
tell people about what your experience of this amp was? Because you're using more bass than I would ever turn up on this
Okay.
amp, which I think is cool.
I like a little bit of thump in the first, the kind of more percussive stuff
Yeah.
that I might do on a gig. So I like to play sometimes back by the bridge, so having that extra bottom end, you get the twang from the guitar, but then the bottom end from the amp gives it a little bit of a push, so I like that.
So what was interesting about the amp when we opened it up was that they hadn't taken bass out of the treble channel.
Okay.
They'd modified it so the bass was still there. He liked bass.
Ah.
And it was clear from opening the amp up there was a lot of bass.
I'd rather have it than not have it.
Yeah.
You know?
In my band, the bass player said, there's a bass player in this band?
Sure. Well, if we bring the baritone guitar out, then we'll talk bass. You know what I mean?
I always wondered why 50s sound so much different than 100s.
Yeah.
Well, the power supplies are different. We put what we saw and documented in the 50-watt amp, and it sounded much closer to the 100s than the regular 50s. If the power supply voltages are different or the caps are different, the whole thing sets the amp up differently. A lot of the artists, when we sent them the initial prototypes of the amp, they weren't trying to sound like Hendrix. They were trying to sound like themselves, and they found it as a tool to use with their stuff to get that tone. You know, these recording artists are recording artists. They want to sound like themselves. They don't want to sound like somebody else. But I think it really surprised everybody what a beautiful sounding piece of gear it was. The other thing is that you and I decided not to put a master volume in it. And now, in the day, that was his PA.
Right.
You know, they were micing the vocals, they were a little teeny bit of drums, but the guitar in the room was, that was the PA. The 100 watts loud, the 50 watts loud. So, you know, if you're gonna be playing with pedals, the thing's clean as a whistle, turned down, and it's got a, not high gain, but medium high gain when it's dimed, and I find it lovely to play through.
To be such a simple circuit, you know, people say, it's just some an old British amp. It can get more tones out of it than it's amazing how different. You bring up the bass channel, you bring up the treble channel, you drop the bass channel, you dime both of them. And then the tone stack is real sensitive. The presence control, and then we chose to. It's in lieu of giving you we've got a bright switch on it, which went on the original, but in lieu of the original bright cap on the lead channel, which will take your head off, bright.
Well, if it was down below 6, it'd take your head off. Up around 6, it was okay. But below that, it would take your head off.
So, but we gave the option, of 2 different bright caps, just for
or none.
Usability, or none, So
the other thing is that the amp has a switch on it, which puts in the 0.68 cap around the cathode follower. And that was on his touring amps, and documented that we've seen it wasn't on the recording amps. And so you have a kind of a touring recording switch on the amplifier, which I go and use all the time. It adds some high mid-range and up gain to one of the channels. And I find myself turning it on for clean tones and off for dirty tones.
Okay.
Let's talk about tubes for a minute. New old stock tubes and the quantities that we're going to be shipping weren't available. So, as you know, we went through every available EL34 we could get. We went through the 6550s that were available. We went through all the preamp tubes, and I bought a boatload of new old stock tubes and compared those to what was available. And I think what we have in here is as good or beating the new old stock stuff that we bought. Yeah. I'm really pleased with the way the amps are sounding.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And again, when we finally hit on the right combination of tubes, it was like, okay, immediately we saw that those were the ones.
So what did you do to make the circuit board and pots and how it holds onto the tubes robust so it could survive a lot of jangling around?
Well, just like to oversize everything. I just oversize PC boards. We wanted to not make them so from one to the next, having their own personality. We wanted every one of them to be as similar as possible. Yeah. And so I just tried to lay it out where we could get the sweetest tones, with the grounding and all the things that go into.
I forgot about how quiet it is.
Yeah,
it's quiet as a mouse.
Yeah, you can.
Well, you did a good job on that one. It's really quiet.
How do you improve on a good amp?
Yeah.
So you take little things like that, and you try to, you do all the work to try to improve on them, because we're basically standing on the shoulders of giants with this amp.
I think that it's a benchmark tone in our industry. What's blowing me away about it is that how universal it is. You could use it for anything, from jazz to country music. You could use it for anything, and I think that that's demonstrated really well when the artist came and played through it in the other video. But I think, Doug, you did a great job. I'm proud to be your partner on this.
I'll tell you, we were partners on this one.
Look, Hendrix signature's on the back of this amp.
Yeah, I know. How
does that make you feel?
That's pretty wild.
I asked myself 100 times, would he think we had done a good job? And I think the answer is yes, because we had over and over again compared to amps that were exactly the same.
I sure hope so.
The other thing, I guess, is the sound of those amplifiers was as much a part of the sound as the guitar, because that was the other part that I was stunned by when we started to make this circuit, was that I realized it was as much the amp in the cabinet as it was the guitar. Right. I mean, I can tell you that a really harsh sounding cabinet is going to be harsh sounding no matter what amp plays through it. So I would like everybody to give the cabinets a try with these amps. The 212's got some bass.
We worked as hard on the cabinets nearly as the head. I mean, it was 2 or 3 different designs. There's some differences in a regular 412 design, materials, speakers.
Yeah, well, the wood it's made out of made a difference in the tone.
Absolutely,
all kinds of things made a difference. So, look, I think of the paradigm of guitars as almost like a teepee in which musicians are pushing out to make it bigger, and I think he made the whole living area of playing guitar much larger. And the impact that he had on me personally and our industry is almost incalculable. So this was one of his tools for making music, and the fact that we were able to get this to work right, couldn't be more pleased with.
I can't state highly enough how much work you did on it. It was truly a team effort.
So here's the circuit board with the wide traces that you did.
Right.
Why is it purple?
It sounded better.
It sounded better because the purple one was
Right.
the iteration that you got it right on.
Right, yes.
But you think purple made it sound better.
It all added up.